What if a single lake system held enough fresh water to drown the entire United States under 10 feet of water? And what if that same place, hundreds of miles from any ocean, was hiding over 6,000 shipwrecks beneath its surface? This is the North American Great Lakes. And at first glance, they seem simple. Just a group of large lakes on a map. But in reality, there's something far more complex. A massive, interconnected system that behaves like a slow-moving waterfall, constantly shifting water across an entire region. And somehow, this freshwater network supports an economy powerful enough to compete with some of the largest countries in the world. So what's really going on here? Because once you look closer, the Great Lakes start to reveal some truly unexpected facts. Here are 15 incredible geography facts you probably didn't know about the Great Lakes. When you look at the Great Lakes on a map, it's easy to underestimate just how massive they really are. But the real story isn't their size, it's their volume. Combined, these lakes hold an almost unimaginable 6 quadrillion gallons of water. And that number is difficult to grasp until you put it into perspective. Because this single system contains about 21% of all the surface freshwater on Earth, and an incredible 84% of North America's total supply. In other words, this isn't just a group of lakes. It's one of the most important freshwater reserves on the entire planet. But here's where it gets even more extreme. If you could somehow drain all that water and spread it across the contiguous United States, the entire country would end up under nearly 10 feet of water, coast to coast, completely covered. And that single fact changes how you should think about this region. Because the Great Lakes aren't just geographically impressive. They're strategically critical, acting as a massive freshwater bank that supports ecosystems, industries, and millions of people. In fact, when it comes to total freshwater volume, very few places on Earth even come close. Only Russia's Lake Baikal and the planet's polar ice caps hold more, which means this region isn't just important for North America, it matters globally. Lake Superior doesn't just sound impressive, it actually is. By surface area alone, it's the largest freshwater lake on Earth, spanning over 31,000 square miles, roughly the size of Austria. But that's only part of the story. Because what really sets Superior apart is what lies beneath the surface. In some places, it plunges more than 1,300 feet deep, and that depth changes everything. Lake Superior holds over half of all the water in the entire Great Lakes system combined. More than Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario together. In fact, you could pour all of those lakes into Superior's basin, add the volume of 3 more Lake Eries, and it still wouldn't overflow. That's how massive it is. But size isn't the only thing that makes it unique. Its deep, freezing waters create an environment that feels far more like an ocean than a lake. Waves can grow violent, storms can turn deadly, and conditions can change without warning. Lake Superior isn't just big, it's powerful. The Great Lakes are so large, they don't just sit on the map. They actively shape the weather around them. In fact, they function like massive regional climate engines. And the reason comes down to one simple property of water. It holds heat far longer than land. So while the surrounding ground cools quickly in autumn and early winter, the lakes stay relatively warm. And that's where things start to get interesting. When cold, dry Arctic air moves south and passes over these warmer waters, it picks up huge amounts of moisture almost instantly. That moisture rises into the atmosphere, condenses, and then falls back down as snow, but not evenly, in narrow, concentrated bands. This phenomenon is known as lake effect snow, and it can be incredibly intense. Cities like Buffalo, New York, and Grand Rapids, Michigan can receive multiple feet of snow in a very short period of time. While just a few miles away, conditions might be completely clear. Blue skies, no snow at all. The difference can be that extreme. It's a reminder that these lakes aren't just passive features of the landscape. They're active forces shaping the environment in real time. It's easy to think of the Great Lakes as 5 separate bodies of water, but in reality, they behave like one massive, slow-moving river, a system that quietly carries water across an entire continent. The journey begins in Lake Superior. Sitting at around 600 feet above sea level, it acts as the starting point of this enormous flow. From there, the water begins to move, gradually, almost unnoticed. It travels through the Street Marys River into Lake Huron and Lake Michigan, then continues south through the Street Clair River system into Lake Erie. But this is where the calm flow suddenly changes. Because between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, the system hits a dramatic drop, the Niagara Escarpment. Here, the water plunges over 326 feet in elevation, creating one of the most powerful natural spectacles on Earth, Niagara Falls. What looks like a beautiful landmark is actually a violent choke point in a massive freshwater system. And once the water passes this barrier, the journey isn't over. It continues flowing east through the St. Lawrence River until it finally reaches the Atlantic Ocean, a slow-motion river, hiding in plain sight. The Great Lakes may feel ancient, but in geological terms, they're surprisingly young. The system we see today only took shape around 10,000 years ago, right at the end of the last ice age. Before that, this entire region looked completely different. It was buried under the Laurentide ice sheet, a massive glacier stretching across the continent, reaching thicknesses of up to 2 miles. And when it moved, it didn't move gently. It reshaped the land itself. As the climate began to warm, the ice slowly retreated northward. But in the process, it acted like a giant bulldozer, grinding, scraping, and carving into the Earth's crust. Softer rock was ripped away, while harder layers resisted, shaping the uneven landscape beneath. Over time, this created enormous basins across the region, deep scars left behind by the ice. And then, something incredible happened. As the glaciers melted, vast amounts of water flooded into those basins, filling them completely, transforming them into the massive freshwater system we now call the Great Lakes. What looks stable today is actually the result of one of the most violent natural processes in Earth's history. Technically, they're called lakes, but in reality, they behave like something far more dangerous. Because of their massive size, storms over the Great Lakes can form incredibly fast. And once they do, the conditions turn brutal. Unlike the open ocean, these lakes are relatively shallow, which forces waves to become steep, tightly packed, and relentless. Instead of long, rolling swells, ships face sharp, chaotic walls of water, hitting them one after another. And over time, that has made these lakes incredibly deadly. In fact, the Great Lakes are one of the largest underwater graveyards on Earth. Historians estimate that between 6,000 and 10,000 shipwrecks lie scattered across their floors, along with the lives of around 30,000 sailors lost over the centuries. But one disaster stands out above the rest: the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975. During a violent storm system known as the Gales of November, the massive freighter was overwhelmed on Lake Superior, and despite its size and strength, it never made it back. The wreck shocked the modern world because it proved something important. These aren't just lakes, they are inland seas, and even the largest ships are not safe from them. The story of the Great Lakes isn't just written in geography. It's written in language. Because the names of these lakes carry the history of the people who lived here long before modern borders existed. In fact, 4 of the 5 Great Lakes take their names directly from indigenous languages. And each one reveals something about how these waters were understood. Take Michigan, for example. Its name comes from the Ojibwe word Mishami, meaning simply great water, a name that perfectly captures its scale. Ontario tells a different story, believed to come from a Huron word meaning lake of shining waters, a reflection not just of size, but of appearance. Erie was named by early French explorers. After the Erie tribe, an Iroquoian group that once lived along its southern shores, and then there's Huron, the exception, a name given by the French to the Wendat people rather than taken directly from their language. And when you step back and look at all of this, you start to realize something important. These names aren't random. They're a record, a reminder that long before European exploration, this region was already known, named, and understood by cultures that had lived here for thousands of years. In the early 19th century, moving goods across North America wasn't easy because standing in the way was a massive natural barrier, the Appalachian Mountains. Stretching for thousands of kilometers, they effectively blocked direct access between the Atlantic coast and the resource-rich interior of the continent. But in 1825, everything changed. With the completion of the Erie Canal, a man-made waterway that connected the Hudson River directly to Lake Erie. And with it, the entire geography of trade shifted. Suddenly, goods could move from the Midwest straight to New York without having to travel down the Mississippi River. And the impact was immediate. Transport costs dropped by an astonishing 95%, almost overnight. What was once expensive and slow became fast and efficient. And that changed everything. The canal redirected the flow of agricultural wealth, pulling it toward the Great Lakes and into New York. This triggered a massive population boom across the region. Cities grew, trade expanded, and New York City quickly rose to dominance, becoming the financial and commercial center of the United States. All because one artificial connection broke a natural barrier. As Chicago grew rapidly in the late 19th century, it ran into a deadly problem. The city's sewage was being dumped directly into the Chicago River, and that river flowed straight into Lake Michigan, the same lake that supplied the city's drinking water, which meant one thing: the city was poisoning itself, and the consequences were severe. Outbreaks of diseases like cholera and typhoid spread quickly through the population. Something had to change. So engineers came up with a solution that sounded almost impossible. Instead of cleaning the river, they decided to reverse it. In 1900, after years of work, a massive canal system was completed, carved directly through the Continental Divide. By lowering the river's channel, they forced the water to flow in the opposite direction, away from Lake Michigan and toward the Mississippi River Basin, permanently changing the natural flow of the region. It was one of the boldest infrastructure projects ever attempted, and it worked. Chicago's drinking water was protected, but the geography of the entire system was never the same again. It might sound strange, but at one point, naval warfare was happening in the middle of North America. During the War of 1812, the Great Lakes became a critical battleground because controlling these waters meant controlling the entire interior of the continent. Supply lines, movement, strategy, everything depended on the lakes. And both sides knew it. The United States and the British Empire began rapidly building fleets along the shores of Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. What followed wasn't just a conflict, it was an arms race. Shipyards expanded. Fleets grew. and tension escalated across the region. The turning point came in 1813. At the Battle of Lake Erie, American forces, led by Oliver Hazard Perry, secured a decisive victory over the British fleet, a win that shifted control of the region. But despite moments like this, the larger war ended in a stalemate, and that led to something unexpected. In 1817, the Rush-Bagot Treaty was signed, strictly limiting military presence on the Great Lakes, and turning what had been a war zone into one of the most peaceful borders in the world, the foundation of the modern US-Canada relationship, built not through dominance, but through restraint. Today, the Great Lakes are more than just a geographic feature. They form one of the most powerful economic regions on Earth, stretching from Chicago and Milwaukee in the west, through Detroit and Cleveland, all the way to Toronto and Montreal in the east. This interconnected zone functions like a massive cross-border mega-region, and the scale is hard to ignore. Around 60 million people live within the Great Lakes Basin. That's nearly 1/5 of the entire US population, and about a quarter of Canada's. But it's not just about population. It's about output. This region combines dense urban centers, historic industrial infrastructure, and some of the most productive agricultural land in North America, which makes it a global economic powerhouse. In fact, if the Great Lakes region were its own country, its integrated economy would generate more than $6 trillion in GDP, putting it among the top 3 or 4 largest economies in the world, larger than most nations. And at the center of it all is water, the same system that shaped the geography, now drives the economy, quietly powering supply chains across an entire continent. Moving raw materials across the Great Lakes isn't simple, especially when those materials come from the mines of the upper Midwest and need to reach the industrial centers of the lower lakes. Because between them, there's a major obstacle, the St. Mary's River, connecting Lake Superior to Lake Huron. But this connection isn't smooth. The river drops about 21 feet through a series of powerful, dangerous rapids, which makes direct navigation nearly impossible for large ships. So instead of going around the problem, engineers solved it with the Soo Locks, located in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. These massive structures act like elevators for ships, lifting and lowering vessels so they can safely move between the two lakes. And the scale of this system is enormous. Around 10,000 ship passages every year, carrying roughly 86 million tons of cargo, mostly iron ore, coal, and grain. In fact, by total cargo volume, this is the busiest lock system in the world. And that makes it more than just infrastructure. It's a critical choke point, because if these locks ever stopped operating, the impact wouldn't be local. It would ripple across the entire North American manufacturing economy. Factories would slow, supply chains would break, and the system would feel it almost immediately, all because of a single point on the map. Beyond trade, industry, and shipping, the Great Lakes serve an even more important purpose. They sustain life. Today, more than 30 million people across the United States and Canada depend on this system for their drinking water, which turns the Great Lakes into something far more than a natural feature. They're a lifeline, but that lifeline is under constant pressure because modern threats are building often in ways that aren't immediately visible. Agricultural runoff, for example, carries nutrients into the lakes, triggering massive toxic algae blooms, especially in the warmer, shallower waters of Lake Erie. Then there's industrial pollution, some of it dating back decades, still lingering in the system. And invasive species like zebra mussels, quietly disrupting the entire food chain. These pressures don't just affect ecosystems. They directly impact millions of people who rely on this water every single day, which makes protecting the Great Lakes incredibly complex. Because this isn't managed by one country or even one government, it requires coordination between two nations. 8 US states, 2 Canadian provinces, and numerous indigenous and tribal communities, all working together to protect a shared resource. Because if this system fails, the consequences won't stay local. They'll be felt by millions. When people think about the Great Lakes, they usually imagine endless open water. But that's only part of the picture. Because hidden within this system is a surprisingly complex world of islands. In total, there are over 35,000 islands scattered across the Great Lakes, creating isolated ecosystems and even small, separated communities. But one island stands above the rest, Manitoulin Island. Located in Lake Huron on the Canadian side, it's the largest freshwater island on Earth, large enough to support a permanent population of around 13,000 people. But this is where things start to get strange, because Manitoulin isn't just an island. It's an island filled with lakes, more than 100 of them. And some of those lakes are so large, they contain their own islands, which means you get something almost impossible to picture. An island inside a lake, on an island, in a lake, a layered geography that feels more like a paradox than reality. It's one of those places that reminds you, the deeper you look into this region, the stranger it becomes. The Great Lakes aren't just an inland system. They're directly connected to the global economy through something called the Great Lake Street Lawrence Seaway, completed in the 1950s. This massive network of locks, canals, and engineered channels opened up an entirely new reality. Suddenly, ocean-going ships known as salties could sail thousands of miles inland, straight into the heart of North America. And the scale of that connection is hard to grasp. A ship can load grain in Duluth, Minnesota, the furthest inland freshwater port in the world, and travel over 2,300 miles without stopping, passing through locks, navigating around waterfalls, crossing an entire continent, until it finally reaches the Atlantic Ocean. And from there, the rest of the world, that's not just geography. That's a man-made extension of the ocean itself. And when you step back and look at everything, the scale becomes clear. The Great Lakes shape climate. They power economies. They move industries. They sustain millions of lives. There may not be a single geographic system more important to both the United States and Canada, because in a world where fresh water is becoming more valuable every year, these lakes are something else entirely. They are a reserve, a safeguard. In many ways, the continent's savings account. And maybe the real question isn't how powerful they are today, but how important they'll become in the future.